Welcome back. You're still watching the Nile article, and for the second segment for tonight, we'll be shedding more light on the efforts of Egypt to be de-escalating the situation under the guidelines of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Foreign Minister Dr. Badr Abdullah regarding the Middle East war between the United States, Iran and Israel, and how things have developed over the past 4 or 5 months on the negative side for the globe, and more specifically for the oil prices and what is happening regarding the Strait of Hormuz. So in the search of the political and the economic stability, the search continues regarding this important topic in the upcoming reports. Stay tuned.
The Middle East is once again navigating a crossroads where diplomacy and deterrence are advancing side by side, each attempting to prevent the region from slipping into a broader confrontation. What initially appeared to be another chapter in the long-running tensions surrounding Iran has rapidly evolved into a wider strategic challenge involving regional actors, major international powers, and global institutions determined to preserve stability in one of the world's most sensitive geopolitical theaters. Recent statements from U.S. President Donald Trump have intensified international attention. Declaring that Iran will never possess nuclear weapons, Trump also warned that Tehran could face a hard hit should diplomatic efforts fail. These remarks underscore Washington's commitment to maintaining strategic pressure while leaving the door open for negotiations, reinforcing the balance between military deterrence and political engagement. Yet, amid increasingly firm rhetoric, diplomacy hasn't disappeared. Qatar confirmed that intensive contacts are underway to contain tensions and bring the conflict to an end, highlighting the growing role of regional mediation in preventing further escalation. The coexistence of diplomatic initiatives and military preparedness reflects a new regional reality where dialogue and deterrence increasingly operate in parallel rather than in opposition. From the very beginning of successive regional crises, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has consistently maintained that there can be no security without political solutions. Egypt has repeatedly warned against expanding the circle of conflict, stressing that sustainable peace can never be achieved through military action alone. Cairo continues to support de-escalation, respect for international law, and diplomatic engagement as the only viable path toward lasting regional stability. Today, the strategic equation extends beyond the interests of individual states. The security of maritime routes, the stability of energy corridors, the future of nuclear non-proliferation, and credibility of international institutions have all become interconnected. Every diplomatic initiative, military deployment, and political declaration now carries implications that reach well beyond the region itself. As international mediation continues and military preparedness remains visible, the Middle East finds itself confronting a defining question. Can deterrence preserve peace, or will diplomacy ultimately determine the region's future security architecture?
Welcome back. You're still watching Nile article, and to be shedding more light on the latest developments and the updates regarding the Strait of Hormuz and the Middle East war between the United States, Israel and Iran, and the efforts of Egypt to be de-escalating the situation. I'm honored to be having with me via Zoom Councillor Hossam Allam, the international law expert. Councillor Hossam Allam, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Nile TV International and Nile article.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Anytime. The pleasure is all mine. Of course, we have seen what has happened in the Middle East for the past 4 or 5 months. Do you think that this will be reshaping the regional security and the architecture of it, or is just a temporary conflict?
Again, thank you very much for having me. International law teaches us that every regional crisis is ultimately a test for the resilience of the international legal order. Throughout history, military capabilities have altered the balance of power, but it has always been legal principles, sovereignty, the prohibition of the unlawful use of force, peaceful settlement of disputes, and respect for international humanitarian law that have determined whether crises remained contained or evolved into wider instability. Today, developments in the Middle East should therefore be understood not merely as a geopolitical confrontation, but as a defining moment for the effectiveness of the rules-based international order and its capacity to preserve regional and international peace and security.
Yes, Councillor Hossam Deen, Allam, we have seen the statements of the U.S. President Donald Trump, not just for the past few weeks, but for the past few months. One of them is that Iran needs to be hit hard and that Iran would never have nuclear weapons within this war or after the conclusion of this war. How would you interpret those statements and other statements that we have seen according to the international law?
Definitely, this is a very important question to start with, and this shows us a bigger picture with regards to the new regional security architecture, rather than just a temporary crisis. We are witnessing more than an isolated crisis because regional security is now directly connected to energy flows, maritime routes, nuclear non-proliferation, humanitarian consequences, and global economic stability. The emerging architecture is no longer based solely on military balances. It increasingly combines deterrence, diplomacy, mediation, economic resilience, and protection of strategic infrastructure. This is why, in light of all of these very complicated unfolding developments, I do think that a sustainable regional order cannot be built through force alone. Under the UN Charter, states must settle disputes peacefully and refrain from unlawful threats or use of force. This is why it's very relevant here in this regard to stress the point that Egypt's position is that lasting stability requires political settlements that preserve state sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the resources of the peoples in each and every country. This is why I do think that, Ahmed, the real test is whether current mediation efforts can evolve into permanent mechanisms that will ensure the viability and the meaningfulness of dialogue, crisis prevention, de-escalation, and collective regional security in this regard.
Yes, Councillor Allam, you've mentioned that there will be a new security picture for the region, and you've mentioned also the position of Egypt. How do you see the role of Egypt following the conclusion of the current war?
Yeah, definitely this is a very relevant and timely question, especially in light of how active the Egyptian diplomacy, foreign ministry, and even the presidential diplomacy of Egypt is very present at the very core of all of these evolving developments. And this brings to the mind here the question of what will determine whether diplomacy succeeds in preventing another escalation, and I'm referring here in particular to the pioneering diplomatic role played by the Egyptian state in this regard. Let me clearly state that diplomatic success requires sustained political will from the principal parties, not merely temporary tactical engagement. Mediators must maintain, of course, credibility, communication with all concerned parties and stakeholders. So here I'm referring to all the concerned sides, and the stability of the region also requires the ability to propose realistic, face-saving solutions. The process should address underlying security concerns rather than mere focus only on suspending immediate hostilities and military acts. International institutions as well,
Yes.
they can support verification, guarantees and implementation, but they cannot substitute for genuine commitment by the concerned parties. Egypt's approach remains highly relevant, of course. Rapid de-escalation, negotiated political solutions, respect for sovereignty, and prevention of wider regional confrontation all are very important and very pertinent components.
Yes, Councillor Allam, you've mentioned the Egyptian diplomacy with Foreign Minister Dr. Badr Abdul Ati, but what about the Egyptian diplomacy under the leadership of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for today and even for the past few months, ever since the eruption of the war between the United States and Iran on the 28th of February? We have seen messages of constant support from President al-Sisi towards the GCC countries, towards Iraq and Jordan. Today we have seen President al-Sisi receiving the Bahraini King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa in the Al Alamein city. How do you see the importance of those messages of support and condemnation for the attacks against the GCC countries and the rest of the Arab world?
Definitely, it's very expressive of Egypt's significant diplomatic approach in international de-escalation efforts. Let me state it very clearly here in this regard that Egypt has maintained a consistent position that regional crises must be contained before they expand geographically and politically. Egypt's approach rests on respect for sovereignty, non-interference, peaceful settlement, protection of civilians, and the preservation of regional stability. Egypt's credibility here in this regard derives from maintaining dialogue with diverse regional and international actors rather than aligning itself with escalation. Also very closely related here in this regard, its geographic, political and institutional weight enables Egypt to connect Arab, African, Mediterranean and international diplomatic efforts. This consistency reinforces Egypt's role as a stabilizing state, advocating negotiated settlements rather than open-ended military confrontation. And let me also here add the very important point that regional states are increasingly taking the lead through mediation, shuttle diplomacy and direct communication with the concerned parties. International powers remain influential because of their military presence, economic weight, sanctions, policies, and of course the roles played and to be played by the Security Council. This is why effective crisis management requires complementarity rather than competition between regional and international actors. Regional actors in this regard provide contextual knowledge and political access, while international institutions can provide legal legitimacy, guarantees and implementation mechanisms. This is why I do think that it's very important here to state clearly that a durable regional order should be shaped primarily by regional priorities while remaining consistent with the UN Charter and international law. And here, in this regard, there are principles
Yes.
of international law that should shape the conduct of all concerned parties. First, sovereignty and the sovereign equality of states must be respected. Second, states must refrain from unlawful threats or uses of force and must settle disputes by peaceful means. Thirdly, self-defense is available only within the strict conditions of Article 51 of the UN Charter. Number 4 here, where armed conflict exists, IHL or international humanitarian law or the law of war or the law of armed conflicts requires distinction, proportionality, and feasible precautions to protect civilians and civilian objects. Fifth, violations may engage international responsibility, including here obligations of cessation, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition.
Yes, Councillor Hossam Allam, the international law expert, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Nile TV International and Nile Oracle.